Right. I am Kay Teal. I'm a metadata librarian here in Seoul in Metadata Services. And for those who've just joined, Nancy Lorimer is out this week, so I decided to step in for this week's Metadata Monday. I'm going to cover adding holding statements, FOLIO holding statements, and FOLIO. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, you should now see FOLIO inventory FOLIO test. And before I get started, I'm just going to mention a couple of things about what I'm going to cover is adding FOLIO holdings. This is new holdings. I think Nancy next week will cover existing holdings. So if you have questions or you're curious about what to do about migrated holdings, please hold on to those for next week. I'm going to cover adding new holdings. So as you can see, I'm in inventory. And I've got some canned examples I'm going to walk through. And another disclaimer is all of these examples are fake. What I'm going to enter is how the data would be entered, but don't get worried if the records look wrong or weird, because these are just, for example, for testing purposes. Also, I just want to mention that while I'm presenting, I can't see chat. So if you have questions, you can put them in chat and I'll get to them later. Otherwise, just hold on to questions until I pause the demo, okay? So I'm starting off with a situation where, let's say I've just imported a brand new record, and again, for test purposes, for this demonstration purposes, I haven't overlaid a record that has any items on it. So this is a brand new record. There's no items, as you can see. So I'm going to walk through what you would do in this situation. As you can see, we don't have a call number yet because we haven't added any holdings yet. So first I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find my call number, which hopefully is here. Yes. And I'm going to copy it. Now I'm going to do add holdings. And since I was cataloging this, I know it's a multi-part monograph. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to set my holdings type to multi-part monograph. And now I'm going to give it its location, which, as you can see, is required. And I'm just making up. I'm pretending everything goes to cell 3. And my call number type is a Library of Congress call number type, and I'm entering the call number. And I think we covered this a few weeks ago, but this is just kind of review about how to enter a call number. So as you can see, we filled in all of this. Now, if I had a single part monograph, I could stop here because I've entered my call number and my location, and the next thing I would do would be my items. But actually, I have a holding statement because I have a multi-part monograph, and I want to give the holdings to say what we have. So as you can see, right below the call number area, there's holdings details. And what we want is holding statements. So if you're used to working in Symphony, we had MARC holdings. In FOLIO, the equivalent basically is the holding statement. And you can see there's an add holding statement, there's one for supplements, and there's one for indexes. Just like in MARC holdings and Symphony, we used to have an 866 field, an 867, and an 868 for these different types of holdings. So basic holdings go in the add holding statement. I press that button, and you can see there's a box for the holding statement public note, and there's even a holding statement staff note. So all I'm going to demonstrate today is adding holding statement in this box. I'm not going to demonstrate adding the notes, but as you can figure out, holding statement public note would be equivalent to the type of public note we used to enter in Symphony Mark Holdings. We used to put them in the 852 field, subfield Z, and staff notes, we didn't use those in Sewell, so I don't know, but I know some other locations use staff notes. But again, I'm not going to demonstrate the notes today because I don't actually have that prepared. I'm just going to do holding statement. So for my multi-part monograph, let's say I know that we have FASC 1 to 2 and 5 to 6. And again, if you're used to working in the Symphony system with Mark Holdings, you can see that I'm entering the data in a very familiar type of way with a caption and numbers and a comma to indicate that we don't have FASC 3 and 4. And there's no space. We are following the standard that we're still going to follow that standard as much as possible. So that's why, and there will be documentation about that if you've never entered holding statements before. But if you're used to looking at holdings in Symphony, this should look pretty familiar. And then I would save and close. And as you can see now, I have my holdings. And if I want to see the statement that I just entered, if you click on View Holdings, let me go back. I did that pretty fast. I'm looking at this. I use View Holdings. I can see it's a multi-part monograph. I see my location, my call number, and here's the holding statement down here. And if we had notes, those would be filled in. And as you can see, the holding statements for supplements and indexes, if we had entered those, would also appear. Well, let's say that I entered those holdings, but then I realized that we actually, I need to give more detailed information, that the holdings are a little more complex than I thought. So I want to edit what I just entered. So I'm going to click View Holdings, and I go up to Actions, and I click Edit. And I scroll down to my holding statement. And let's say that I figured out that our holdings are just a little more complicated than the information I'd given. And again, like, don't worry too much about this. There will be documentation that is almost finalized on formatting this kind of information. But again, if you've worked with Mark Holdings in Symphony, this will look kind of familiar. So I've entered my more complex data, and now I save and close. So as you can see, that was pretty easy to edit. So that was a multi-part monograph record. Now I'm going to demonstrate doing a monograph with accompanying material. And again, I apologize if you have questions and you can't see chat. So I'll look at it after I've ended the demo. So this is a monograph with accompanying material. If I can get the record to come up. If not, don't panic. I have the same record in Stage just. Okay, let's try Stage. Okay, it's a little slow, but copy my call number. And so I can show you up here the physical description. As you can see, there's a volume with 168 pages, and then there's like one sheet with maps. So you can see it's like a volume and there's an accompanying sheet. So again, I have to add my holdings. Now, holdings type for a monograph that has accompanying material is going to be a book, because basically the main thing that's circulating is a book. That's the main holdings. And I'm going to give it a location. And again, you see add holding statement. It's exactly how I just demoed. So we're going to do add a holding statement. And in this case, because it's accompanying material, I say we have one volume, that's the book. Then I do space plus sign, and I can go one sheet. And if you want to be more specific, you could say one sheet of maps. And then save and close. Okay. And my last demonstration will be a serial. Again, I haven't entered my holdings yet, so let me scroll down and get my call number. And here I can show you, I don't think there's we have a publication range that began in 1975 with a question mark because we don't really know, and it ceased with 8.2, which was the June 1982 issue. So we know that the holdings will be within that range somewhere. So now I'm going to add holdings, and because I have a serial, my holdings type is serial. I hope that all makes sense. And then stacks. And it's right here, holdings details, add holding statement. So normally for serials, it's fine to give what we used to call level 3 holdings in Merck holdings in Symphony, but it's basically the basic holdings. It's not detailed because we have everything from volume 5 to volume 8. So I can save and close. And as you can see, we've entered that. And again, if I need to look at it, I could click on the view holdings and see the holding statement that I just entered. But again, if you are familiar with serial holdings, sometimes we need to enter more detailed holdings. And in that case, I could edit my holdings and give some more detailed information. And again, this format is standard with what we had been doing in Symphony. And there is and will be documentation on how to format that data. Okay, I will look at chat. Okay, I see. It looks like Ria has answered. Okay. Yeah, it's just because I was having trouble with FOLIO test. Most people should be working in FOLIO test, and FOLIO stage is kind of a backup. The data is a little older, but because I was worried about FOLIO test not working today, I went ahead and kind of prepared my examples in this backup system, as it were. Okay, so those demonstrations were brand new cataloging where we just imported a record and I hadn't created any holdings yet. Now I'll walk through what happened if, say, you imported a record or there's a record that's cataloged in FOLIO already, but you'd need to add FOLIO holdings. And again, I'll pause here and just say today I'm not going to cover what to do when holdings migrated from Voyager or Symphony. I believe Nancy is going to cover that next week. This is just brand new FOLIO holdings. So as you can see, let's say we've got this cataloged record. And as you can see, holdings have already been added because there's a call number and location. And if I scroll down to the physical description and it says volumes, this is a multi-part monograph. And you can see even there's contents note that says there was one volume is for the first Louvre and the second one is for the Bourse. So, so I know that there's at least 2 volumes. But if I do view holdings, we don't have holdings details. There's no holdings statement. If I see that, you can see the holding statement is empty. So I want to add the holdings for what we have. And let's say there's an item here. Let's say I'm not sure what we have yet. So if I look here, I can look for this enumeration data and see that we have the second one. So I go to View Holdings and I click on Edit. And I've got my holdings type multi-part monograph. This is filled in. So what I want to do is add holding statement. And since there isn't like a standard abbreviation, at least in terms of a holdings per se, I'm just going to enter what the second volume was called. This is the type of situation where, because this would be kind of unusual as a caption for holdings, I would say if your library wants to abbreviate it, that's fine. To match the enumeration, if you want to spell it out, that's fine. The only thing I'll point out is that it's normal to do the caption or the word first and then the number. And that kind of distinguishes it between those monographs with accompanying matter where we give like 1V to say that that's the volume we have. So I've entered my holding statement and I do save and close. And if I scroll down, we can see there's the statement. Okay, the next one that I will demonstrate is that monograph with accompanying matter. And again, we have added holdings already for the location and we have the call number filled in. And if I scroll down to the physical description, I can see like there's a volume with 11 unnumbered pages and there's 24 postcards. So you can see there's a volume, the book, and 24 postcards. So again, I'm demonstrating this to point out that, we've already added holdings. So we have our location, we have our call number, and you'd be so tempted to click the giant button that says add holdings because isn't that what we're doing? But no, we've already added holdings. That's the holdings. What we want to do is view and then edit, because that's how we add a holding statement. It's not just adding holdings, it's adding a holding statement. And the way to do that is to view the holdings and then edit. So this is a monograph with accompanying material. So the holdings type is book. Got the location filled in, the call number filled in. So now I'm going to add my holding statement to say that we have 1V, that's the book, plus 24 postcards. Now you see it. Okay. And now for the last one is a serial again. And this, to just shake it up a little bit, it doesn't have an LC call number. This is a federal document serial. So we've got our holdings filled in already with our location and our federal documents call number. And so I'm going to click on View Holdings and edit. And my holdings type is serial. Now I do add holding statement. And save and close. Okay, so those were the demos. And now I'll look at chat. So there's a question about, do we need to add number of items in holdings? I don't know if there's a decision about that yet. So that is something to ask Nancy next week. Okay, hold on to that question for next week. Okay, so this is the end of the demos. Will there be training on how to add items? So yes, I think that one of the Metadata Mondays covered that, but I can quickly kind of show you how to do it here. So again, you would add your holdings first, which I did. We have green fed docs. I've got my call number, and now if you click on this little down arrow, it's not the most obvious thing in the world, but that's where you see the barcodes. That's where you see the items. And I can see that I was lazy. I didn't fill in my enumeration because this was just for demo purposes. But normally for a serial, there would be some kind of data in here in enumeration or chronology possibly. But so let's say I'm adding a new item. I would click on add item. And I'm going to quickly make up a barcode. I hope it's a fake one. Okay, so I'm adding my barcode. This is a serial example, so my material type is periodical. Now, I don't need to fill in my call number again. I've already got my call number. So again, this is a serial. So I'm going to fill in enumeration data, just invent something. Here I will stop and pause and say, maybe I shouldn't have used a federal documents. It's not the best example in this case because of the way federal documents call numbers work, but let's not get into that. I think that's it's kind of an edge case. This is just walking you through what you would do in normal circumstances. So I add that. Now the last thing, which I always forget to do because this is required, is the loan type. So you have to go down, scroll down to loan availability and fill out your permanent loan type. And I think they circulate, so I'm filling in can circulate. If you had a non-circulating collection, you'd use non-circulating. So whatever would be appropriate, but that is required for the item. But again, like these call number areas, you don't have to fill in because it inherits it from the holdings. So if I save and close, you can see because up here you've got location and call number, and then you've got your different barcodes. That's what I mean about inheriting. So everything and these barcodes all belong to this call number, basically. Does that make sense? Yes.
Okay. Kind of for a comment. Another way to make a new item is if you go into an item, you can choose duplicate. And what that does is it makes a new item that has all the same values as your existing item, except for the barcode.
Oh, okay. That's great to know.
So it might be useful, like easier in some ways, because those things like the circulation rule, assuming it's the same as your existing item, you would not have to fill it in again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful.
You would have to remember like those things that you do have to change. You have to change, like if it's a serial or enumeration, it will just copy the enumeration from the one that you duplicated. So you have to go change that if it has to be different.
Yeah, so I'll demonstrate that. So here's my monograph with accompanying matter. So you're saying if I do duplicate, I see, and then I'd fill in a new barcode. And it's already got my material type and it's got my loan type. Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
But just like any kind of copy and pasting, you have to remember to change those things you have to change.
That's really helpful, Harold. In manuscripts and university archives, we oftentimes have hundreds or even thousands of item records attached to a holding because the collections are so large. So that ability to duplicate, I think, will be very helpful.
Mhm.
And by the way, you can do that with holdings too, if you're adding new holdings, but that might be outside the scope of this.
So I could duplicate the holdings. Like say they got a copy for regular stocks. And it inherits the same call number. I've already got my call number filled in. And in fact, the holding statement's already filled in. That's great. Thank you, Harold.
Yeah. And one thing I discovered is if you, or in my testing, like if I chose a mark holdings to duplicate, it would duplicate it as a folio holdings,
Mm,
not as a new mark holdings, which is kind of interesting.
yeah, that is very interesting. That's something that you could probably bring up next week because I think Nancy is going to talk about migrated holdings. So let's say like here, if I do this, but I could say like stocks, copy, plaques, postcards. So that demonstrates like a public note. And then if you scroll down, you can see the holding statement public note. And since it's a public note, it will display in SearchWorks. While I'm here, the other thing I can point out is, as you can see, we are not worrying about the space in the call numbers anymore. FOLIO doesn't care and SearchWorks doesn't care. So that space that for those of us that have worked in Symphony that was driving us nuts, we don't have to worry about it. And we're also, we're still including the size designation as part of the call number and not in suffix, but since FOLIO allows lowercase, we're entering them in lowercase. So those T's and those F's for FOLIO and the FF for giant FOLIO, these can be lowercase now. Okay, were there other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So in the mark holdings that we're used to, there's a thing called encoding level that you kind of mentioned before. I take it in folio holdings, there's no such thing.
Yes, that is correct. In FOLIO, there is no such thing. So in the documentation that I've written up for FOLIO holding statements, I'm just mentioning that because really it was only making a difference for serials because everything else was supposed to be entered as the most detailed level. So for serials, you had an option between less detailed and more detailed, and that's how I'm describing it in FOLIO holdings, that they're if you have a serial that needs more detailed information. Everything else where you're going to enter a FOLIO holding statement, you will want to enter all the details of the holdings that you have. So in my example for the multi-part monograph where it had complicated fascicle numbers, let me go back to that. Oh, right, I did that in test. Okay, but I can quickly do that here. So here, I mean, so let's pretend, I mean, this is just has fascicles, but let's say that fascicles have parts and we're trying to track like the parts, not just the fascicles, but each part that we have in holdings. Again, the way to think about the holding statement is we're trying to give kind of an at a glance information for our patrons in SearchWorks so they can quickly see what do we have. And as Laura mentioned, some records can have these huge lists of items. And if a patron just really quickly wants to see what we have, they might not be willing to scroll down through hundreds of items. So that's the purpose of the holding statement. So let's say for this one, we have all of fascicle 1 to 3, but for fascicle 4, we only have part 1. And then for fascicle 5, we might have part 1 to 2. Something like that. Again, it's kind of gonna depend on what you have and if it's complete. And if we don't know, if there's a gap, for instance, we put a gap with a comma. Commas mean gaps. But let's just say like fascicles 1 to 3 didn't have parts, then fascicle 4 had part 1 and a part 2, which we don't have. And then fascicle 5 had part 1 and 2, and maybe it's not complete, we don't know yet. But this is what I mean about the details. You want to give the details that you know. So Kevin raises a very good point in chat. I realize this might be going against proper practice, but is it really necessary to add a holding statement for a 2-volume set that is complete? So that's a policy decision, and I'm not here to make policy decisions. So that might be a good question to raise to Nancy next week. I think there has been discussion, especially for the multi-part monograph scenario, where it's really just a single time publication that's in a couple of volumes, and we have everything. So we have a 2-volume set, it's complete, and we don't expect any more volumes. There are no volumes. There are no more volumes. It's not being published over time. That kind of scenario, I believe there's been discussion on how useful a holding statement is in those situations. But I don't know that any change in policy was made. What I can say is that in Symphony, the practice was to give a holdings for that situation.
Okay, so you had said that you would use like the same input convention or format, that we use for mark holdings. So does that mean that if we have documentation we referred to in the past for that kind of thing, we can use it and just disregard anything about mark coding this in there?
Well, the mark holdings documentation is being updated, so it will basically remove references to mark holdings, and it will remove the mark tagging, because as you can tell in FOLIO, there is no tagging. So it will be a lot shorter than what you might be used to. But yes, how to enter the data, though, basically is the same as it was. And that's because how to enter the data is not dictated by mark holdings. It's a ANSI NISO standard that we've been following, and that apparently the FOLIO community says they are also following for FOLIO holding statements. So the mark holdings documentation that was maintained by metadata services in SUL, that will be replaced by documentation for FOLIO holding statements. And when that goes live on our console site, that link will be shared. And since it's a Google Doc, I can share it to people outside of SUL. Okay, are there more questions or comments? If not, then I hope everybody's saving their other questions for next week. I can end the meeting early because this was the only thing on the agenda. So unless someone else wants to jump in with a different topic. I am happy, always happy to end meetings early. All right, thank you, everyone. I will stop sharing and I will end the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.